We're still reeling from Joann's closing all of its stores nationwide, and out of the blue comes the announcement that DGA, the parent company of the Big Four sewing patterns, has been sold to a liquidator for $1. Now, fast forward to July, and that same liquidator is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. What does this mean for the future of sewing patterns? There's been a lot of speculation, and you may have even watched some other videos on the subject. But this one's going to be different because I'm not just a sewing YouTuber, I'm also a lawyer. And I've taken the time to read the bankruptcy pleadings so that I could give you an accurate representation of what's going on with the sewing division, plus some personal observations and thoughts on the matter. Hi, I'm Tony, and this is So Lounge. Now, I am pulling out all of my legal research and reasoning to give you the up-to-date information based on the most recent pleadings filed with the court. Now, interestingly enough, the bankruptcy is taking place in the Southern District Federal Court, which happens to be right here in Houston, Texas, where I am. What's going on, first of all? Why would this company be purchased and then suddenly be put into bankruptcy? So the terms of the sale were that the liquidator purchased DGA from its UK parent company for $1 plus 75% of any assets sold. So they're going to get some money on the back end of this, but meanwhile, this liquidator was stuck with all these different product lines and had to figure out a way to start managing them to repay debts. Now, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because bankruptcy affords a company certain protections to be able to restructure and consolidate debt and raise capital without being flooded with lawsuits from individual creditors. So that was the reasoning behind filing for Chapter 11, that you kind of stay all those proceedings and get to try and restructure and reorganize your company in a way that you see fit to try and keep it viable. Now, we know this did not work well with Joann's. They initially filed for bankruptcy in 2024. They couldn't make it work. And in 2025 came the announcement that it was going to be a total liquidation and they were selling everything off and closing all the stores. An example of a successful Chapter 11 restructuring would be the Container Store, which closed some stores, reorganized, and is still operating today. Now, obviously, this is what we're all hoping for when it comes to the pattern division and the sewing division of this company. So, just to give a little bit of back history, originally, the pattern companies were all individually owned. Little by little over the years, they started consolidating. The two main branches of the sewing company are owned by a division of DGA called CSS. And then within that, they have the Simplicity Creative Group, which holds most of the brands. And then there's also the McCall's Group. And then there's also McCall's Distribution as another separate division, all within that CSS company. So it's a lot of companies and a lot of divisions. And if you look at the chart, it's kind of funny because this is the liquidation company and they purchased the DGA here. And CSS Industries is one of the companies that are part of DGA. But then CSS has so many lower branches that it has its own page with all the divisions specifically outlined. So Simplicity Creative Group is one of them, also the McCall Pattern Company, McCall Distribution. Further down here, we have some of the other non-debtor parts of the company which aren't located in the US. So you have Wrights Commercial, which is part of the sewing division. It is Notions. You may have seen Wrights bias tape at Joann's back in the day. That's located in Shanghai. There's also a McCall Pattern Company in the UK. There's one in New Zealand. There are also Dominion Simplicity Patterns, which are in Canada. There's Simplicity Limited in the UK. So there's also Simplicity in and McCall's both in Australia. So there are a lot of divisions of this company that are not subject to the bankruptcy because they are not in the United States. And some of them have been kept kind of separate. So in the sewing division assets, though, with the debtors that are involved, it is pretty much all of the US production and the design branch of that company. So obviously, we're kind of concerned about this because if it goes away, what are we going to do? But fear not, because there's some good news. So, going through the declaration of Brett M. Anderson, which was in support of the initial Chapter 11 petition, when the liquidators came in and started grouping up the different assets of the company, they chose to group the sewing division as its own asset. So, what that means is they felt that the sewing division had its own value separate from the other parts of the company because of the trademarks and copyrights involved, meaning the actual trademarks of Simplicity, Vogue, Butterick, McCall's, and the other labels, as well as the physical copyrights of the patterns themselves with the actual designs and the printing and instructions. But then also that there's also the whole production aspect of that as another element within the sewing division of, printing the patterns, having the factory that prints the patterns, the distribution, the sales, the website, everybody involved with all of that part of the production process. So the technical term that they used, which is that they consider these assets a going concern, which means that they feel like this group of assets can exist independently and can function and keep functioning as their own company, basically. So, why does that matter? Because it would be more appealing to a buyer to come in and just buy the sewing division and all of the assets included. As a functioning company, it has a lot of brand recognition. They have direct to consumer products, meaning that you buy the pattern on simplicity.com, it gets mailed to you. It doesn't have to go to a store first where you buy it like a lot of the other lines with this same company. So that's the good news, is that they have categorized sewing separate from the other divisions and that they do consider it to be a viable product in that there could be a buyer who would come in and buy the entire sewing category and all of the individual companies underneath that are within the US and subject to the bankruptcy. So, where are we going with this? As of right now, the various companies that are subject to the bankruptcy, which I previously mentioned, have all listed their assets and liabilities. All of that is filed with the court. And at this point, the liquidator is looking for buyers to come in and potentially buy the entire sewing division, or in theory, they've also said that parts of the sewing division could be broken up, meaning that you could take, some of the pattern companies and not take buy the production, or vice versa. Obviously, best case scenario is that one buyer buys all of the assets within the sewing division and moves forward with things as they are. We're not going to know until September 8th because that is the deadline for any buyers to put in offers. Now, if there's only one buyer, they will know who that is. If there are multiple offers made on that division, then there will be an auction on September 11th to determine who's going to actually bid the highest to take over that division. So what does this mean? Well, it could mean a variety of things. Let's start with patterns. If you have looked at the simplicity.com website since all of this started, you may have noticed, like I did, that they have been having constant sales on paper patterns, on all the patterns, frankly, but I think primarily paper, since the first announcement that they were purchased by the liquidator. Okay, so that's something, and they're just rotating between the brands. So if you see something you like, put it in your cart. If you miss the sale, it'll come back around. I have a bunch of stuff from Simplicity that wasn't on sale. It's back on sale today. So keep an eye on that. The other interesting thing is that last week, a little window popped up. It said something to the effect of, it said due to excessive orders, shipping may be delayed, which is interesting because I've been shopping on simplicity.com for quite a while. And I've hit some of their Black Friday sales, and past years where patterns were marked down to $1.99 and ordered quite a few to hit that $75 minimum free shipping. And I've never seen this before. So I believe that it's an indicator that something is going on within the company as far as maybe production, maybe distribution, maybe supply. I don't know. But it's something to keep in mind, because if you want some patterns, maybe you should get them now while they're on sale. The other thing that just popped up today is another notice on the checkout page that if you are not a customer in the US or Canada, there's another website for you to go to buy patterns. Now, I don't know if this website has been there because frankly, why would I look for patterns outside of the US? But if you click on the link, you can see that there are a wide variety of other patterns. Everything is in British pound sterling, and they're still out there. So it's not like what's happening in the US is necessarily affecting pattern production for the other branches of this company that are not part of this bankruptcy and that are not part of the US division. So what are my thoughts? Because I've been looking at this and I've been watching this, and I asked an industry insider who's been involved with the pattern business for over 50 years, was on a call, and I said, hey, what's going on with this? And that was before the bankruptcy was even filed. And she said, look, the pattern companies have had a variety of different owners. Since she's been in the business, there have been 8 different owners. She goes, this happens. Things get restructured. I'm not going to stress until I need to stress. She's like, my contacts have said business as usual. And if you follow the Simplicity Creative Group over on Instagram, you might have seen Mimi G's Instagram reel talking about this exact topic and basically saying the same thing. They're still designing, they're still creating, they're still coming up with, content and patterns, and that they're not going anywhere. Okay, but let's think about this. The same industry insider told me that there's only one factory now in the US that still prints paper patterns, and that the costs of printing those patterns are going up. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever paid full price, list price for a pattern before. I've always waited until they went on sale. But if you take a look at the back of some of your sewing patterns, you might be shocked to find out what the actual list prices of them are. So here's what I'm suggesting, which may or may not happen. If paper patterns do continue to be produced, either here in the US or outside of the US, and maybe imported, who knows, the prices are going to go up. We're not going to be seeing these crazy sales like we've had at Joann's and on the simplicity.com website, because the cost of production is just getting too high and there aren't that many factories printing them anymore. And really, who wants to pay $27 for a Vogue pattern? They're on sale right now for $6.99. So that's a consideration. The other thing to think about is what nobody is saying. Nobody is saying we're going to keep paper patterns, but they're saying the patterns will keep going on. I think it's entirely possible that there's going to be a shift towards PDF patterns, because as much as we don't want to admit it, corporations, big companies don't really care about you and me and what we prefer when it comes to sewing. If they'd taken into consideration what our thoughts and feelings were, none of this would have happened. Joann's would still be a fabric store and not have gone to crafting and cake making and scrapbooking and wooden models and all the things that it turned into that basically caused the company to go bankrupt. I think it's going to come down to the bottom line and what's profitable. And while there's no way of knowing exactly what's going to happen at this point in time, because ultimately this is going to be a decision for whoever ends up buying this division and the sewing assets to make the decision of, do we keep printing or not? I think it's something to just have in the back of your mind that companies tend to go with the bottom line, and paper patterns are expensive. And they probably, at best, are operating at a break-even kind of margin, maybe even below that. I don't know. I don't know if the pattern sales that have been ongoing since May are a result of just trying to drive capital or get rid of product and clear out warehouses so then you don't have to rent the space and pay the workers. It all is very cyclical, and it could all mean a variety of things. But I know that when money gets tight, in a lot of instances that you can look back through and see, they're going to transfer the cost to the consumer. And if we have to pay more money to print PDFs, either at home on our off of our computers, or going to the copy shop and getting them printed on drafting paper, I don't think they're going to have a problem with that, because we're the ones who are going to have to deal with that cost. And if you want to sew, it's just add it to the additional cost of sewing. So I think it's a great possibility. Now, maybe they'll keep the paper patterns and they'll just sell them at list price, which means, anywhere from, I went through my pattern cabinet and pulled out some recent patterns, and I found Simplicity pattern that was $24.99, which was crazy. And then a bunch of Butterick patterns that were $19.99. And like I said, the Vogue patterns are the high-end ones, which, are usually between like $27 and $30 per pattern. So that's another alternative. And maybe, who knows, they'll just completely shift to printing patterns outside of the US, and then we'll have to deal with tariffs importing them back in. Or maybe if you're fortunate and you travel outside of the US, and presumably Canada, because they seem to be affected by the same printing that we are, you can go buy patterns elsewhere. So that's just something to think about moving forward. Personally, I'm going to hang on to all the paper patterns I have, and I'm fortunate that I have quite a collection. But then, if there's some patterns that are being reissued, like some of the DVF wrap dress and other similar patterns, I'm probably going to go buy those for $6.99. I'm not going to lie, because I'd like to have some more of those designs that I don't currently have. And there are some vintage patterns that I have had my eye on that I think would be cute and fun to add to my collection, because I don't have that sort of thing. So what does this mean for you? Take my advice. Hold on to your paper patterns. And, if you see something you like, buy it, because it's an uncertain future. Based on reading all of this extensive filings with the bankruptcy court, it's not as dire as I initially thought when I started doing the research for this video. I do think that the liquidators really want to sell this company, or the sewing assets, as they're being called, that group. They have indicated that some of the other groups are being completely liquidated, namely Ribbon. So if you've heard of layoffs, a lot of that is related to the Ribbon division, which they are completely shutting down and completely liquidating. But that's its own division that is separate from sewing. And while I'm sure there probably have been some layoffs, they will probably continue based on the pleadings through the end of August and into September, because that's the structure they've laid out. I think it's highly possible that the sewing designers and that group are going to stay intact if they can find a buyer. And I think the motivation is to find a buyer, because, internationally, this is a much bigger group of, people all over the world sew, and they still have divisions outside of the US. And, I think they want to keep that around. Sewing is popular here. It's still extremely popular in other countries. So it's not just us. But I'm optimistic that they will find a buyer. Based on some of the language, it seems like they have at least one buyer to put in a ground floor bid at like the minimum amount that they're going to take to try and actually sell some of these assets that are viable. And then, some of the other divisions, which are, toys and gift wrap and more seasonal items, they may end up liquidating those. But even those have been broken out individually in the bankruptcy paperwork. So we don't know what's going to happen exactly, but, it's not dire in that, the future, the end is near and all of that, doom and gloom. But I would say it's something to keep an eye on. I will be keeping everyone updated on my monthly live streams, and the next one will be after September 11th. So hopefully we'll have some more clarity at that point in time. Now, if you really don't like PDF patterns and you've struggled with using them, I've got another great video coming up next. It is some tips and tricks that I use on the occasion that I decide to print out some PDF patterns. It's gonna help you, it's gonna make it a little bit easier, and until I find a better solution to using paper, I'll see you over there.